the wicked prosper. The Gemara talks about the story and events of Purim and asks, what was it that gave Haman that kind of power and that kind of influence which enabled him to bring about a threat against an entire Jewish people? Generally speaking, whenever wickedness seems to prosper, whenever evil seems to be succeeding, there's always the obvious question, why? How could this be? Because by Torah logic, by truth, evil should never succeed. Unholiness should never have any power over holiness. And as a chassid once asked the Rabbi, what is the true reason, the inner reason, for crying on Yom Kippur when we read about the 10 martyrs? We read about the 10 great martyrs whom the Romans killed. We read about it in the Musaf of Yom Kippur. And usually, for most people, when we come to that part of the davening, we begin to cry. Now, of course, it's a very dramatic reading. It's a tragic reading. And it is Yom Kippur, and people are pretty serious-minded at the time. So people cry. But the chassid wanted to know what the inner, truer reason for crying, more than the mere sentiment of a sad story. Because, after all, we didn't know these people. They were not our friends. We don't really feel a loss of those particular individuals, so why are we crying? Is it simply a sad story? So the Rebbe explained that the reason we cry is because it bothers us that the Romans, who were wicked, evil, unholy, could have such power over holy people. Evil succeeding against holiness. When that happens, it bothers us, because it shouldn't happen. So a chassid cries when he reads about the 10 martyrs because he's disturbed. Why should klipa, why should unholiness have so much power? So it's not a matter of history. It's not that it once happened, but even today, why should klipa, why should unholiness have so much influence? In a way, in a sense, crying over it actually takes away some of that power. We take back the power given to klipa, and that eliminates, or at least lessens, the power of unholiness, of evil. Specifically, talking about this evil man called Haman, Haman Harasha. Haman was a grandson, or great-grandson of Amalek. Amalek is basically the evil, the personification of the evil that is the antithesis of enthusiastic service of God. So let's talk about Amalek for a moment. When the Jews came out of Egypt, the excitement and the enthusiasm for godliness, for holiness, for the Torah that they were going to receive was very strong. Not only among Jews, but throughout the whole world, because people heard and were impressed by what happened with the Jews coming out of Egypt, splitting of the sea, and so on. Amalek came along and cooled off the enthusiasm. One of the things that Amalek did is to come along and say, look, God split the sea into 12 parts, and that's terrific. No question that God did this. Amalek is not an agnostic. It's not that he doesn't believe. Amalek drains the enthusiasm. He comes along and says, God split the sea. God brought plagues against the Egyptians. Fine. God makes manna fall from heaven to feed 2 million people. Good. But what are you getting so excited about? So what? After all, God can do anything. So what's the great excitement? What are you getting so excited about? Notice the miracle, believe in the miracle, but why the excitement? Why are you singing and dancing and praising God? Are you surprised that God can perform a miracle? Of course God can perform miracles. Didn't you know that before? So why are you so excited? Amalek doesn't argue the issue. He merely says, fine, it happened, but so what? You don't have to go out of your way change your lifestyle, and get carried away, God performed a miracle. But then again, why shouldn't he? After all, he is God. That's the unholiness of Amalek. What is the holy side of that? A miracle is something we don't understand, that we couldn't predict. It's higher than our nature. It's greater than our capacity. So why is it that people are overwhelmed and moved by a miracle? Because it is something we can't grasp. We can't get a handle on it. We don't understand how it can happen or why it happened. So we're moved by it. We're overwhelmed by it. It's bigger than me, and anything bigger than me moves me. On the other hand, the fact that we're moved by it means that even though it's an event, an occurrence which we don't understand and can't grasp, yet we somehow are relating to it by the fact that we're moved by it. So it's not like a miracle happened, and because it's beyond our comprehension and we don't understand it and we don't know, and therefore we don't care and we remain unaffected and indifferent. It is out of our realm, it's beyond our comprehension, but it's not outside of our world. We don't remain indifferent, we're moved by it. A miracle makes a Jew do a mitzvah with more enthusiasm. And that seems to be somewhat of a contradiction. If a miracle is something much higher than we can comprehend, how is it then that it affects us personally, that it actually changes something in our behavior? In Hasidic terminology, if a miracle is makif, if it surrounds you, it overwhelms you, it's bigger than you, how can it at the same time have an inward effect? How can it also directly influence your behavior? We usually assume that if something is bigger than our comprehension, we remain indifferent to it, because it can't be bigger than us, surround us, and be inside of us at the same time. Another example, another form of this, if we're doing mitzvahs because we understand the mitzvah, when we understand the mitzvah, then we're obviously taking things personally. I understand. If I can assimilate the idea into my way of thinking, then I accept it. Then it becomes my thing. If I don't understand it, or I don't choose to understand it, I want to do the mitzvah not for my own reasons, not for reasons that appeal to me. Rather, I want to do the mitzvah because it is God's command, because it's what God said. In other words, I'm doing it submissively, obediently. I'm accepting the yoke of heaven. Then I'm not rationalizing, I'm shouldering. I'm taking upon myself to do what God wants. So if a person is doing mitzvahs in that fashion, can he also be enthusiastic at the same time? If you're not doing it for your reasons, meaning to say you're not sinking your teeth into these mitzvahs, into the rationale of the mitzvah, you're not getting personal satisfaction from the mitzvah, it doesn't touch you personally in a personal way, then where would you get the enthusiasm with which to perform this mitzvah? Sure, you can still do it. Obedience is a normal, common enough event. You can do it because, after all, God created the world. It's His world. He's the boss, and what He says goes. And so you do it. But enthusiasm? From what? Can you be obedient and enthusiastic about the same thing? Enthusiasm seems to imply personal involvement, personal feeling. Obedience seems to imply putting aside your personal feelings and doing what God wants. Chassidus says, and we experience this actually in life, that a person who serves God obediently can do so with enthusiasm. An example of that, which surrounds us on the one hand, is bigger than us on the one hand, and yet we somehow assimilate it inwardly so that it affects our behavior. But Amalek wants to stop that. Amalek comes along and says, this thing is bigger than you. It's something only God knows how to do. It's a miracle. You don't understand the miracle, so what are you getting excited about? The fact that God did it? That's nothing to get excited about. This is child's play to God. So for God, it's no big deal. And for you, well, you don't know what it is anyway. You don't understand miracles. So what are you getting excited about? Why are you taking it personally? That is Amalek. That is the indifference of this unholy trait which Amalek, the people of Amalek, personified. Now Haman came along, being a great-grandson of Amalek. He came along and he said to Achashverosh, to the king, he said, we really should get rid of the Jews. Why? Because they're scattered among all the nations, and their laws are different from all of us. They live by different laws. So what is he saying? What if we weren't scattered among the nations and lived by different laws? Would that be okay? What if we were scattered among all the other nations and lived by the same laws as the other nations? Would that be fine? Yes, that wouldn't be so unbearable to Haman. What's not bearable, what isn't fine, what's not acceptable, is that they, on the one hand, live among all the other nations, and yet at the same time they have different laws. Haman couldn't understand that. He couldn't tolerate that. You can't have it both ways, he argued. You want to do mitzvahs you understand. You want to do the mitzvahs that make you feel good. That's reasonable. Everybody does that. On the other hand, you don't want to do the mitzvah for personal reasons. You don't want to have any enthusiasm. You just want to do what God says. That's also fine. Obedience is a fine trait. But you can't have it both ways. You can't live among the other nations, with the other people, and yet have your own set of laws. You can't be both higher than us and live with us at the same time. You've got to choose. You can't be both. You can't do the mitzvah obediently and be enthusiastic about it. You can't see a miracle and then take it personally. You can't have that. Why does Amalek, why does Haman insist on separating the two? Here's where we get to the question of how the wicked prosper. How does that which is unholy gain energy? Sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's weak. While Haman was sitting on top of the world, the evil, the wicked were strong, they were prosperous. Esther comes along and she speaks to Achashverosh, and the whole thing gets turned around. Haman is hung, and all of a sudden the wicked are not so strong. So what is it that makes the wicked prosper at times, where they seem to rise to greater heights and greater strengths? And then at other times, they can't seem to do anything at all. In the act of creation, we are told over and over again that each day of creation contained an evening and a morning. It was evening and it was morning one day. It was evening and it was morning the second day and the third day, and so on. Every day of creation had both a time of darkness and a time of light, good and bad. And practically speaking, everything was created during those 6 days of creation. The holiest things and the most unholy. The pig was created then, unholy, unkosher, and human beings were created during those 6 days. The land of Israel was created, the holy land, and the land of Egypt, the most unholy of lands. So in the act of creation, during the 6 days of creation, all things seemed to receive an equal amount of attention. There was no discrimination. There were no distinctions made between good and bad. They were both created side by side as equals. There is a level in creation where the difference between good and bad doesn't exist, where all things are the same. On some level, right and wrong doesn't matter. And that's called in Kabbalah and Hasidus the world of chaos, Taihu. In the world of order, there right is right and wrong is wrong. There's an order. But in the chaotic world, all things are equal. In order for Haman to succeed, to pull off his plans, he went ahead and built a gallows 50 cubits high. 50 cubits high. Seems a bit excessive. Assuming that the average person is 6 cubits high, 50 cubits high seems a bit excessive. But he built a 50-foot gallows, 50-cubit gallows. And by the way, it says that he built it out of a plank from the ark, from Noah's ark. But at any rate, it was 50 cubits high, and he did that because the number 50 represents the 50 gates of Bina, the 50 gates of wisdom. The 50th gate of wisdom is beyond comprehension. 49 gates of wisdom make up human comprehension. The 50th gate represents the stage of comprehension that is beyond ours, beyond human. And it says, for example, in Tehillim, in the Psalms, that when God created man, he said, and he was missing, he was just short of being God, of being God-like. And what was it that he was missing that made him just short of being God-like? The 50th gate. He had 49. Adam had attained 49 gates of wisdom, but he was still lacking the 50th gate. Moshe, we are told, attained even that 50th gate. Which means that the 50th level, the number 50, is a transcendent level. It's the level that is above our comprehension, meaning to say that it is the level above the world of order, above the breakdown of right and wrong, where right and wrong are indistinguishable, where the good and the bad are equal. And it is from that level, from that place, that evil succeeds. A person, generally, to use an example, a person, unless he's educated properly, is arrogant. A human being is born a wild animal. And unless he's educated, unless he's taught, unless morality is cultivated, right and wrong would mean nothing. Because to the ego, and because of the wildness and the untamed character with which a person is born, the person wants to do everything, the good, the bad, the ugly. Why should he distinguish? It's only when he's taught, it's only when he's elevated to a more moral level that he begins to see distinctions, to make distinctions between right and wrong. So, the more the person is educated, the more distinctions he will make. With some people, the sum total of their moral commitment, of their moral awareness, is that you don't kill people. And that's about it. They know murder is wrong. Saving a life is good. Taking a life is bad. That's the sum total of their morality. That's all the distinction they know how to make. The more educated person, the more genteel person, a more edel person, has many more distinctions of right and wrong, till finally you come to a level where you know right from wrong in every act, in every detail in life, even in how to tie your shoes, how to wash your hands, how to greet a person. Everything has a right and a wrong. The more sophisticated a person becomes in morality, the more distinctions he finds, and the more distinctions he makes between right and wrong. Now, the more we distinguish the right from the wrong, the less energy is left to be wild, the less energy there is for the evil. Because that original energy that was wild and untamed has now been captured and channeled into productive behavior. The more distinctions made between right and wrong, the more wildness has been used, channeled and contained, and therefore there is less wildness. In other words, the indiscriminate cannot siphon energy from this source of energy because the energy has now been made discriminate. It's been channeled into discriminate behavior. And when the energy is occupied, when the energy is reserved, when the energy is held by orderly, discriminate distinction, then the evil doesn't have access to that energy. And the same is true in the world in general. The more energy that went into creation which was an indiscriminate energy, as we said before, the more of that energy that we channel into morality, into goodness, into Torah and mitzvahs, the less energy is left for indiscriminate giving. This indiscriminateness is what makes evil equal to holiness. And more than that, when there is indiscriminate giving, when the energy remains indiscriminate and is therefore up for grabs, then the evil is more capable of siphoning that energy, of living off that energy, than is the holy. Because holiness can't tolerate indiscriminateness. It can't really accept what is given if it's given indiscriminately. And that's why a person who is holy, who is really moral, feels uncomfortable when God gives him more than he deserves. More than you deserve is indiscriminate. The person who is holy doesn't feel comfortable with that. And that's why God created the world incomplete, imperfect. Because if the whole world was perfect, then a human being with this kind of sensitivity would feel uncomfortable with life, because he is given life and sustenance and health all for nothing, because he's made no contribution. The world is complete. So any sensitive person would feel that that's indiscriminate. So why am I? Why was I given all this? For no reason? For no merit? For no worth? Then it's indiscriminate. Then I didn't earn it. And indiscriminate life, indiscriminate giving, makes the holy person, the moral person, and every Jew is holy, makes him feel uncomfortable. And that's why in Jewish thinking, we're always trying to find, what do we do to merit this? What do we do to merit that? What merit does this mitzvah bring? What merit does that mitzvah bring? So why do we always have to be looking for what brings the blessing? People seem to get blessings and to succeed without thinking about it, without worrying about what brings it. And we're always sitting around thinking, what's going to bring this and what's going to bring that? And that's because we don't want it for free. We don't want it indiscriminately. We want it to fit. We want it to be appropriate to what we're doing, to how we're living, and so on. That's generally the attitude of holiness. Like the dipping of the apple in the honey. We want to do something to bring about a sweet year. So when God is giving indiscriminately, then the evil feels much more comfortable taking that kind of energy, taking that kind of life, because evil thrives on indiscriminateness. It's consistent with what evil is. Unholiness thrives on indiscriminateness because unholiness is indiscriminate. Holiness, on the other hand, means the distinction between right and wrong. If you're basically a discriminating kind of person, then receiving indiscriminately wouldn't suit you. You wouldn't thrive on it. It will make you uncomfortable. So holiness does not thrive when life is being given indiscriminately. Holiness wants to earn and to deserve and to feel that what is given to it belongs to it. Unholiness thrives on the indiscriminate. What does a Jew do? What does Torah do? Torah comes along and says, and this is explained at length in Chassidus, capture the indiscriminate energy, bring it into the orderly world where things are discriminate. And it's not enough to leave the chaotic world to itself and live only in the orderly world where things are right and wrong, but you have to do more than that. We have to take even the indiscriminate energy and channel even that into discriminate behavior. Concerning the child who is born wild and indiscriminate, untamed, it's not enough to add to the untamed behavior another dimension of behavior which is tamed and purposeful and moral. That isn't enough. You have to take all the energy that is strong and intense and vibrant but indiscriminate, and all that intensity channel into discriminate behavior. Which means take that which is bigger than yourself, bigger than right and wrong, bigger than the details, and using its strength and potency, channel it into practical, personal improvement. Because then you have both benefits. You have the intensity that exists only in the indiscriminate, and then you have also the purposefulness that comes only from discriminate behavior. So you're bringing the makif, you're bringing that which is bigger than you into your world without diminishing it, without cutting it down to size, without losing its intensity. So, we were saying before, you serve God the way He wants to be served, the way He wants to be served, and yet you do it with your enthusiasm. You see a miracle, something only God knows how to perform, and yet it affects you and your behavior in a very personal way. Now this Amalek can't stand. Amalek thrives when things are left indiscriminate, when the energy that God channels into this world remains unidentified, not earmarked for any particular behavior. And when it's indiscriminate, Amalek thrives. By taking that which is indiscriminate and channeling it into holy activity, earmarking it for proper behavior as distinguished from improper behavior, you've drained, you've siphoned off the energy that Amalek thrives on. Because once it gets captured in purposeful behavior, once it gets translated into good deeds, then the unholy cannot use that energy anymore. It has become purposeful, and the unholy cannot share, cannot derive energy from that which is purposeful. Once it's been earmarked for indiscriminate behavior, the unholy has to go elsewhere. It can't live off that anymore, and that's what ultimately happened to Haman. When Jews were not doing what Jews are supposed to do, when Jews were not living the way a Jew is supposed to live, then the indiscriminate energy was up for grabs. And who grabs it best? The wicked. That's when they prosper. That's how they prosper. That's what the 50 cubits was for. And the same thing we see also in the fact that when Haman wanted to decide what day to use as the day of annihilation, God forbid, he threw lots. He drew lots. He didn't use a logical procedure. He didn't sit down and figure it out logically. He drew lots. And what is that? It's totally beyond logic. And this is the way Haman is, because that's where the wicked prosper, on those levels of existence that are not geared, not captured, not channeled into orderliness, into logic, into the behavior of the orderly world. And so it was through the lots, through that which is indiscriminate, that he chose the day in the month of Adar to annihilate the Jews. The name of the holiday, Purim, which is named after the lots that Haman drew, implies the strength and the origin of Haman's energy. Haman could succeed. Haman could become that powerful because he was receiving energy from this indiscriminate life force that God gives. What happened to bring Haman down? Mordechai came along, he aroused the Jews, made them realize what they were doing wrong, woke them up to the fact that they had to be Jewish, and that they couldn't rely on Achashverosh to protect them, and so they all did teshuvah. They took this energy that was indiscriminate, the godliness that is higher than our understanding, the super-rational, that which surrounds us and hovers above us, and they made it part of their everyday life. They accepted the yoke of heaven, only this time with great enthusiasm. This time being the second time after the giving of the Torah, that Jews took upon themselves the yoke of heaven. Only this time it was with great enthusiasm. This time they started to fulfill that which they had promised to fulfill at the giving of the Torah, but with enthusiasm. And what that means is, just like at the beginning, when the Torah was first given, they said, we will do, and then we will hear the explanations. In other words, they were accepting it super rationally. That happened the first time when Torah was given. But on Purim, when they actually began to do that, which means to say they began to serve God super rationally, but with great enthusiasm, they were serving God. And that's how they brought into the orderly world, into the human universe, that which transcended by nature the human or orderly world. They brought into the discriminate world, into the personal life of a Jew, that which is by nature impersonal, that which is by nature indiscriminate, super-rational. And when you take those things, the super-rational, the indiscriminate, and you capture it and you channel it into purposeful, moral behavior, then the wicked no longer have what to prosper from. You've taken away their life source. So when the Jews did that in the times of Purim, Haman had his immediate downfall. His supply was cut off. And so his physical end was only a matter of time, because spiritually he had already been cut off from his life source. So how do the wicked prosper? The wicked prosper when we allow that super-rational energy of creation to go or remain untamed. When we don't use revelation to give purpose and order to creation, then from creation itself the wicked prosper. Because in creation, God was indiscriminate compared to revelation. On the other hand, when we take the intense energy of creation and channel it into the purposeful behavior of revelation, how God wants us to live, then that energy is no longer available to the wicked, and they can no longer prosper. That's why the month of Adar is called the month of transformation, because this month, which was destined to be a month of tragedy for the Jews, God forbid, was transformed into a month of great rejoicing. It's not two separate things. It's not like there could have been a tragedy, but there wasn't, and instead of the tragedy, a victory occurred in place of the tragedy. It wasn't even in spite of. It was from that same place. The same thing that was threatening us was transformed, turned out to be the greatest blessing. And what was that? The super-rational. The super-rational, before it was captured in behavior of the Jew, that's what was threatening us, because that's what makes the wicked prosper. That very same super-rational energy, once it got channeled into behavior according to Torah, that becomes our salvation. So v'napechu, it was transformed. The same thing transformed from bad to good. The same month, the same energy, the same source of strength that was giving Haman his success became the source of our success. That's the advantage of the Baal Tshuva over the Tzaddik. A Tzaddik goes about a holy way of life on a regular, consistent, day-by-day, continuous, gradual growth. But it's not transformation. It's holy. It's always been holy. It continues to be holy. It continues to increase in holiness. But the person who does teshuvah takes that very same energy that allowed him to become wicked, that gave him the courage, the daring to go out and do what is not allowed to be done. That same daring and that same courage allows him and helps him to become a Baal Tshuva. It changes his life completely, transforms it. That's the story of Purim. On that note, we're talking the other day about how a person has to know his place. A person has to know where he belongs, where he fits. You can't just walk into a yeshiva, walk into a school, and already you want to make it to the top. Already you want to know if you can sit in the front. First, we have to see if you can make it to the bottom. Then we have to see if you can make it to the middle. And then we'll see if you can walk to the front. But if you walk in and right away you want to know if you can take over, you don't know your place. And a person needs to know his place. But on the other hand, the person who knows his place would never become a Baal Tshuva, because that's not his place. To know your place means accept the level you're at and be consistent with it. Live by it. But in that case, who would ever become a Baal Tshuva? If you were raised without Yiddishkeit, your family isn't observant, no one in your whole life has ever practiced mitzvahs, so knowing your place, you can't suddenly turn around and start doing all of these things, because then you would be out of your place. So people who know their place don't become Baalei Tshuva. They're either tzaddikim, and that's their place, and they stay that way, or they're not, and they stay that way because that's their place. There was this Jew from Russia, an older man. Wasn't observant in Russia. When he came to America, he wanted to live among Russian-speaking Jews, and so he found the Lubavitchers. He moved into Crown Heights. But Yiddishkeit meant nothing to him. And his friends would schlep him to shul, to davening, to farbrengens. And he liked that. He wanted to participate with Jewish people and so on, but he couldn't bring himself to do it, because he says, this is not true. He was a simple man, peasant. He said, this isn't true. I can't do this. It's not me. It's nice. You do it. But not me. I can't, because I'm not like this. And so people said to him, well, become like this. And he says, what do you mean, become? There's no become. Either you are or you're not. You've got to be true. You got to know where you belong. You got to know your place. So he liked coming to shul. He loved coming to shul. And he would come every Shabbos and stay there for the entire davening. But he wouldn't put on a tallis. And I remember hearing him arguing with one of his friends. And he would say, no, he says, I not bluff. I don't put tallis. I never put tallis. My father didn't put on a tallis. And so, no tallis. Because he knew his place. But on the other hand, a person has to be free to make changes, to take giant steps, to rethink, to rearrange, to move on to radically greater levels of Yiddishkeit, to radically greater levels of goodness, and so on. So knowing your place isn't always a virtue. The previous Rebbe's teacher used to tell him a story before he went to sleep every night. A story with a moral. And most of the time, the stories were actual true events. Things that happened to older Hasidim, incidents in the lives of the past Rebbes and so on. But he would always tell them stories. And one time he told them a story that he had made up, a moshel, about some wagon driver, a very simple man. He knew how to daven, to read Tillim, and that was about the extent of it. And he had this route that he used to take, getting up in the morning, and when he finished davening, he would gather a bunch of people in the city on his wagon, and they would drive off to the train station. And there he would wait for a half hour for the train to arrive. The train would come, the people on the wagon would get off the wagon, and they'd get on the train. The people from the train would get off the train and get into the wagon, and he would take them into town to their various locations. Then he would go home, he would eat something, he would daven mincha, he would gather another group of people, another wagon load of people, and go to the second train, the evening train. And he would drive out to the train station, wait a half hour for the train to arrive. The same thing would happen. He would come home at night, he would daven Ma'ariv, and go to sleep. That was his life. He also had a son, and he tried to teach his son to read, to Aleph Beis. Doesn't go. Kid is thick, he can't learn. Year after year after year, he hired teachers and he hired tutors, and nothing helped. Finally, he says to his son, kid was about 13 years old, he says to him, you're a big, strong boy, much bigger than than your age, stronger than your age, a head for learning you don't have, so let's give it up. Come with me, I'll teach you how to drive a wagon, how to hitch up the horses, and at least you'll be able to make a living. So they went together. Comes the 17th day of Tammuz, Shivasa b'Tammuz, and the father wakes his son up as usual, only this time it's a little bit earlier. What's the matter? So he says to his son, today the davening is a little bit longer, and the way you read, you need some more time. He says, why is the davening longer today? So his father tells him, because today is a fast day. He had never heard of a fast day. He didn't know what that was. But fine. He figured a fast day is when you have to say more in the davening than usual. So he gets up, and he says the extra prayers in the davening. Now he's ready to sit down to eat. And his father says to him, no breakfast. Today's a fast day. Can't eat? So he figures, okay. A fast day is a day when you don't eat breakfast. You don't eat after davening. On a fast day, you eat after you pick up the passengers. So they go off to pick up the passengers. They make their rounds, and he thinks that they're going to stop at the house and eat. His father says to him, what's the matter? What are you stopping? He said, well, I want to eat. He said, I've already told you. It's a fast day today. Kid's an obedient kid. His father says a fast day, so it's a fast day. And he figures that it means that they're not going to eat until they come back from the train station. They go to the train station, they wait a half hour, the passengers get off, passengers get on, they come home, they drop off the passengers, and he thinks, okay, now we're going to go eat. The father says, no eat, go unhook the horses. Fine, takes care of it, waters the horses, feeds them, comes back to the kitchen and says, fine, I did it all, now we can eat. His father says, what do you mean eat? What's with this eat? Today is a fast day. The boy doesn't know what to make of it. Anyway, they go on the next trip to the train station. And the boy figures when they get to the train station, they have a half hour to wait, the father will take him out for a sandwich and they'll eat something. And every time he asks his father gets angrier. He says, I told you already, it's a fast day. Until finally, when they've come home from the train station, the father's still not feeding him. The son got a little chutzpahdik, a little cheeky, and although it was out of character, he says to his father, I don't understand. I came in the morning after davening, you said no food. We came after we picked up the passengers, you said no food. I come back after the first trip, no food. Come back already now for the second time, no food. What is with this fast schmast? I need to eat. His father said, chutzpah. He took the rope from the wagon and he tied the boy up, put him on his bed and slammed the door shut. And he says, I told you once, I told you 1,000 times, it's a fast day. A few hours later, the father comes into the room, he unties him, and he says, come, we'll daven ma'ariv and then we'll eat. So they davened, and they ate, and they went to sleep. In the morning, the father wakes the boy to go to work. So the boy says, forget it, I'm not going. He says, what do you mean you're not going? We have to make a living. He says, no, I'm sorry. He says, I'm not an animal. I can't work all day and not eat. Yesterday you made me crazy, fast, schmast the whole day long without eating. If you're not going to feed me, I'm not going. So the father said to him, yesterday was a fast day, but yesterday was yesterday, and today is today. That was the story. So the Rebbe's teacher tells him the story, and he says, you think I'm telling you stories to entertain you? You think I'm a storyteller? I'm telling you the story because when a kid goes to sleep, a kid should fall asleep with a good thought and with a godly thought. And that is that what was today, but tomorrow will be different. That's the moral of the story. Which means that we mustn't get stuck. Today may have been not so nice, not so good, not so happy, but that's today. Tomorrow can be completely different. So although it's true that a person has to know his place, but even that you have to do with wisdom. You also have to know when you're not supposed to stay in your place, when you're not supposed to be stuck simply because that has been your place. And that's when you capture in a personal way, in a helpful way, that which is not really your place, which is beyond you, which is bigger than you, greater than you, but that doesn't mean that you can't capture it and benefit from it. There is a way in which we can capture even the most super-rational, even that which is beyond our grasp. We may not be able to grasp it, but we can benefit by it, personally, intimately. And that is the whole story of Purim.